Hey guys, welcome back to another video, and lately we've been talking about the spooky season and writing monsters and suspense and all those Halloween-y horror style tropes, and it really got me thinking, especially after the last video, Book of the Month, it got me thinking about horror books and how even though I love horror and have watched a lot of horror movies, I have not read a lot of horror books, which is a real shame because it is a genre that I love. I just don't know why I don't read it very often. It's a habit that I need to get out of, actually. But anyway, today I thought let's just have a little bit of fun. I'm going to talk about the top 5 horror books. Wow, that got very bright all of a sudden. I'm going to be talking about the top 5 horror books that I've read. Now, this is just a list. It is in no particular order, and I am fully aware that the books I mention, there are definitely scarier, more well-written horror books out there. I just haven't come across them yet. So if I don't mention your favourite, if I don't mention a universally accepted favourite, then I'm sorry. But please let me know some titles, send them my way. I would love to read them because the horror. Who doesn't want to read some horror? So let's start with number 1. Again, this is in no particular order, so the fact that it is number 1 on my list does not mean that it is number 1 in my favourites. It's just the first one I'm mentioning. And that is because I have already talked about it a lot, and that is Naomi's Home by Jonathan Aycliffe. Aycliffe? Just check my notes. Yes, Aycliffe. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail with this one because I've already used it for Book of the Month in my last video, but it is just so good. The atmosphere that's built, the character development, the way in which you are never quite sure if this is genuinely a haunting supernatural experience or just the trauma that a grieving parent is going through and the mind is playing tricks on them. The fact that you never quite know, and even when you get to the end, it's still this big mystery that just creeps under your skin. It's just such a good horror. And I love it. The second book I'm mentioning is The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. I love this book. It is so subtle. The idea of experimenting on people but having them unaware of what the experimentation actually is, done in a relatively humane-ish way for the time, but then turned on its head by introducing these new elements and having strangers try to work each other out. And let's be honest, the idea of a haunted house in the middle of nowhere with a bunch of strangers is one of the biggest cliches, and it's a classic, so it's hard not to love it but also be like, but the fact that it was one of the originals gives it a little bit of leeway. Depends on your preference. I personally love it. I also, I'm a huge fan of the Netflix series Haunting of Hill House, and I'm aware that it is very different. I mean, in the book you've got grown adults meeting for the first time, whereas in the series you've got a family that is just jumping from past to present, dealing with these horror situations that they've gone through, and they're two very different takes, but they're both equally as immersive and downright scary. I know, Haunting of Hill House, whether you're looking at the book or the series, you're going to love it for very different reasons. I love the series for its storytelling, character development, the cinematography. Oh my god, some of the shots that they use are just downright artistic and beautiful in the most terrifying way. And I'm only like 4 episodes into Haunting of Bly Manor at the moment, so we'll see how that one goes. But the book has just that bit more subtlety to it, where you're never quite sure what is going on, whereas in the series it's blatantly obvious this is a spook. Here, you play around with psychology a little bit more, and that's what really draws you in. It's just very cleverly done. Number 3. It wouldn't be a horror list if I didn't include at least one Stephen King book, and that is It. Yeah, It by Stephen King. And yes, it may seem a bit of an obvious choice to go through, especially since The two movies were released, I want to say not too long ago, but God knows at this point, time is just blurring into one thing. And I know that there are better, more scary Stephen King books out there. This one just resonated with me a little bit more, because it's a very hefty brick of a book, but what really got me wasn't the parts that focused on, you know, the kids' fears or the clown or whatever's going on with the friggin' turtle, because to be honest, that's just... maybe it's just my brain power, I just don't get it. I don't feel like it adds anything to the story. It just feels like nonsense. I don't know. But the bits that get me are the real life aspects, the abuse that they go through, the tension, the feel like they are lost and that no one believes them, that they are fully alone, and even when they have each other, there's always that element of loss surrounding them. And even when you focus on other characters, like there's this one scene, it's not a spoiler, it's just something that happens to one of the background bullies. It's not really relevant to the plot, but it really shook me up. And I'm not saying, oh, I'm shook, it's like, no, it made me feel like I was shaking. Where it's a flashback where he's younger and he has a new baby sister and he hurts her, and he just doesn't understand how that's wrong, and that's a very real life thing that still happens today, because a child isn't gonna know the full extent of right and wrong yet. And it's the real life issues like that that make this so effective, then mixed in with this demon that is hunting these children down and adds the supernatural aspect to it. I just think it's very cleverly handled, but it does go on a lot of tangents. So even though it is in my top 5 horror books, it's not one that I would willingly go back to again and again. It's just one that I've read, it affected me, it was well written, and now I'm done. Number 4 is Let the Right One In by... I'm looking at my notes and I do not know how to pronounce this name, I'm so sorry. John Ajvid Lindskog. I have butchered that name. I'm so sorry. I'm putting the screenshots up like now. Anyway, Let the Right One In, and I saw, like a lot of people, I saw the movie first, which focuses on a very young bullied child who makes friends with a little girl, but then it turns out that she's sort of bordering on the vampiric side of things, and how he's dealing with that while also trying to have a friend. And I thought, okay, this is interesting, I'll give the book a go. And Jesus Christ, the book goes in a much darker direction than I could ever have imagined, and I can't even say why that is or what that is, because it is just littered with spoilers. And I'm trying not to go into spoiler territory, but the very first scene, it deals with children being sold into very disgusting situations that I don't want to say, but the trafficking being one of them, and the extent these bullies go with this child, and how the vampiric child has a whole other side to them that you just don't see coming. And it's not played in the horror as in gore for gore's sake, or, you know, shock value or anything like that. It all comes together very naturally, in the most unnatural way. Like the narrative of events and the way things are explained, it fits together in this story to really creep you out, get under your skin, make you feel easy and a little bit disgusting, and then suddenly you're like, wait, all of this is making sense for this story, but none of this should make sense in a real life situation. What is going on here? It's one of those ones that makes you think, and also makes you want to throw the book out the window at the same time. It's just very clever and disgusting, but not in a gore for gore's sake way. It's very well done. Finally, number 5, we have Charlotte Says by Alex Hill, and this one really took me by surprise because it's a sequel slash prequel to Frozen Charlotte. And I would just like to point out that I don't do well with dolls. Dolls creep me out. So as you can tell, I'm not doing well with Bly Manor on Netflix at the moment because dolls are friggin' everywhere and I don't like dolls. Dolls just creep me out. Why does anybody like dolls? Why are dolls such a big thing? Yeah, Frozen Charlotte, I really enjoyed. There were some good horror aspects to it. It was very creepy and chilling, but it was very young adult kind of thing. It was teenagers. One's going on a holiday to visit family, one's got this weird thing with dolls, another one wants to accept the dolls with this creepy backstory, and they start to see that maybe there's something supernatural going on with them. But it is very YA tropey in parts. And no, it's still enjoyable, it is still creepy, it's just you're fully aware of how young the audience is that this was aimed for. Whereas Charlotte Says is a prequel that goes back to the Victorian era, where it's the same house and the same dolls, but you're finding out more of an origin, and you're finding out how this place that in the first book was just a family home, but now it was originally a school for troubled children. So the introduction of dolls makes more sense from that time period and troubled children needing something to hold on to. And you're focusing on a new school teacher that is arriving at this place and realizing that not all of these children are okay, and there could be a dark reason behind that, and it all seems to lead to these dolls. And you know from the start that things are not going to end well because it is a prequel to Frozen Charlotte. And ooh, you're reading this knowing things aren't going to be okay, but you just want to read anyway. It feels more grown up, it feels more grim, there feels like there's a lot more threat this time around. I don't know, it just seems to work better for the actual theme of the book, I suppose. It's just very neatly done. So those are my top 5 horror books that I've read so far. I'm going to say that now, so far, because I am going to read more horror, I am going to broaden my horizons a little bit more. Those are just the 5 that I've read that seem to click in my head a little bit more and stick with me, I suppose. Yeah, I'm going to go with that. They just seem to stick with me a little bit better, I suppose. They are the 5 that I remember the most. Why is my camera not focusing? This is really creeping me out now. If you have any horror books that you'd like to recommend, if you have any great horror stories that you think would match the list that I've given already, please let me know. I just really want to read more horror. And yes, I have read classics like Dracula and Frankenstein and Turning of the Screw. I've read a lot of classic horror like that, but these just seem to fit with me a little bit more, I suppose. I don't know. But yes, I hope you're all doing well, I hope you're staying safe, and I will see you all in the next video. Goodbye, my scribblers.